Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Joining us now, Gene Munster in Minneapolis, obviously iconic with Piper Jaffray years ago. Shirley could join us from Deepwater Asset Management, dressed appropriately. Dan Ives here, a color melange with aviator, very nice. It's I'm awake. Gene Munster, I'm going to start with you. Here's Ives. He talks to Barron's yesterday, Adam Clark, and he says Apple, Microsoft, and NVIDIA will be worth $4 trillion. We're not that far away, are we, Gene Munster? How do they get to $4 trillion? Is it cash flow? Is it earnings? Or is it hype?
I think it's probably 2/3 expanding multiple, and I'll touch on that in a second. I think it's probably 1/3 expanding earnings. When you look at, let's just focus in on Apple, the expectations for this year, surprisingly, are the iPhone growth is 3%. It's come down for 5%. This is for fiscal 25. So that number's been declining. It's 8% for fiscal 26. So I think that there's upside to those numbers. Dan and I can talk about how we get there. But I think that's one piece of it. But the second piece is what I continue to believe. We've talked about this for the past year, this 3 to 5 year bull market. So we're probably in the early part of the second year that's going to continue to go up, and in a spectacular bursting of the bubble. And just to put some quick numbers around this, Tom, is that if you look at the NASDAQ, it's kind of trading mid to highest 20% on next year earnings. At the peak of the dot-com bubble, it traded at 100 times. Now, we're not going to get back to the 100 by any measure, but I think you could see a forward multiple of 50 as just the hype around AI is just going to become intoxicating.
Dan Ives, I got on the Bloomberg Apple free cash flow pre-pandemic $60 billion, and they go out now to $110 billion. My thesis here is everybody's looking at the hype and the Dan Ives romance and Gene Munster flying around, Tim Cook meeting with King Charles. Forget about it. Is it just financial oomph that is making Mag 7 go?
Yeah, and look, I mean, me and Jim talked about this before. The biggest thing is, even when you look at Apple, you're not factoring into numbers the AI services piece, as is essentially a new app store gets built on Apple Intelligence, what that means from a services perspective. We think that could ultimately add 10, 15% more to services. And Tom, that's why I think a year from now, you're looking at $4.5 trillion. What I believe over the coming years, we're going to be talking about $5 trillion market caps as we think about Godfather of AI, Jensen, NVIDIA, Apple, and ultimately Microsoft.
So, Gene, I'd love to get your thoughts just kind of because I know you've covered Apple for a long time. You've seen the product cycle for this company over decades here. How do you frame out for your clients the AI play for Apple?
It's twofold. I think the first is just this kind of the tailwind what Dan's talking about. I think that injecting AI into 20% of the world's population a couple of days ago was a big deal about what they added to the 18.2 upgrade. So I think that first part, Paul, is just this hardware growth. And as I mentioned, the street's at 3%. What does it mean for the business injecting AI into this? This is the first time software, this AI features is really the selling point. I think it can be 8% growth. I think we can have meaningful upside to iPhone over the next year. And then the second phase, Dan touched on it around kind of what happens with the App Store, is that you can see it in the drop-down menu. If you start digging around in 18.2, you can see within the Apple Intelligence menu, there's a point where you can pick which LLM you're using. So they're going to add other LLMs. They will add other ones that are paid for. Okay. So you upgrade, then they'll make more on their App Store. So I think that's the second chapter. Hardware first, second is the App Store.
Gene Munster, Dan Ives with us for this entire half hour. And I've already had 3 emails. Yes, folks, in our next block, we'll cover Tesla. Paul, continue here on Mag 7 X Tesla.
Hey, Dan, we've actually heard over the last, couple of quarters, investors ask the question of, okay, I get the AI spend. I see the numbers. I got a sense of it's big and it's incremental. How about the return on that investment? That's now a question that people are hearing. How do you talk to your clients about what are we getting for all this spending on AI?
Look, I think if you look at Salesforce.com and you look what's happened in software, they were waiting in line to get into that AI party. While Jensen's on the dance floor, Ellison, of course, Cook. And now behind those velvet ropes, they're like, Benioff, come on in. Now software is part of the AI party because of the use cases, and that's why it continues to be 10 p.m. in the AI party that goes to 4 a.m.
Okay, I got to switch to Microsoft because, we had this Apple. The world's going to end. China's terrible. Ives is saying shut up and buy it. Munster's saying shut up and buy it. Moonshot Q3, Q4, and it's like Satya Nadella's fallen off the face of the earth. Dan Ives, an update on Microsoft into the quarterly report.
Get the popcorn out because this is just the start of more and more enterprises. Sovereigns.
What are they doing right? I thought ChatGPT was troubled.
Because in the backyard of Microsoft are more and more enterprises. They're moving on Copilot, moving to AI from the cloud perspective. This is really what I view as the more and more the catalyst going into next year. The hyperscalers, not just Microsoft. Okay. Gene's talked about it again, Google, Amazon. This is now the second, third derivative of the AI revolution.
Gene Munster on Google, sort of off my radar here. I mean, search, the government's going to go after them. Do you have a confidence in an entire and total Google versus the split up that we hear from both Republicans and Democrats?
I just got to say one thing about Dan for a second before I answer that, Tom. No one illustrates as a better language of kind of illustrating what goes on than Dan. So I just appreciate that, the party, because that's exactly what's going on. Google has a seat at that party. They're also behind that red velvet rope that you mentioned.
Gene's getting ready to get into that party too, wearing his purple sports shirt. Exactly, the 612.
Paul, you got to take the next question. It's too emotional. I'm tearing up here. Oh my God.
So Google, in terms of Google, basically the pressure point on this is I don't think it's around regulation. I don't think anything's going to happen there. I think it's really what happens with search. And coming back to what happened in the September quarter, I think it was the most important search number that Google has had in the last decade. And specifically is that they saw an acceleration in the US after one full quarter of these AI overviews. And so what that meant is by them injecting AI at the top of the search results, that they were still getting more search revenue. And that's kind of keeps what has been keeping investors up at night. The other beautiful part about the Google story is, they have these other bets. I think what happened related to, their quantum computing, that had $250 billion in market cap this week. That was probably a little bit of a stretch, but what they have around Waymo, we can talk about it in the next segment, what's going on there, and related to Tesla. But I just think Google's in a great position for this AI party.
Paul, YouTube is on fire. I say they're on fire. On the live chat, thank you, HL. Can't wait for Dan Ives.
I know.
What is that about?
But also, look at Paul's Sports Shack. I think no one's talking about that. I mean, he does.
County Donegal, Ireland.
This Sports Shack
even
is
more
next
amazing
level.
is Sweeney's worked 3 Fridays in a row. He's trying to be like the Japanese and get to the 4-day work week to build out the family. Paul, continue.
Hey, Gene, I'm going to ask you to rehash once again. I kind of do it every time you come on because it's so important for our listeners and viewers. Put it into context like you can do AI versus, say, I don't know, the internet, electricity. How big is AI in your mind?
So the framework we use is that, at the highest level, what's been the most impactful has been electricity, and we put that at a scale of 0 to 100 at 100. I mean, it's just hard to argue that piece. But I would put mobile at around 25. I think the PC probably around 35 in terms of the importance. I understand these technologies stack on top of each other, but I just think about in terms of value creation, what they can do for investors. I'd put the internet at 50, and I'd put AI at 90, 95, if not for 100. So I think and I just want to frame in one other piece just around this, like, you hear Dan and I talk about this enthusiasm, this party that's going on, and parties have a tendency to end. And when they end, there's a hangover after it. And we're going to have that in terms of a spectacular burst in the bubble. But I think This party is still, appreciate that analogy, Dan. I think the party's still raging. And I just want to give an example. Broadcom this morning, up 17% in the pre-market. They talked about their 2027 numbers, effectively being like 40, 50 billion. For their AI revenue was 12 billion. And so this concept that like the hardware companies, the NVIDIAs, the Broadcoms, that they're going to somehow hit a wall here in late 24, early 25, it's not happening.
I want to get this in because we really want to focus on Tesla here, this incredible call, these two players here. But let me start with you, Dan Ives, and Gene, I want you to pick up on the same thing. I want you to forget about the media. I want to forget about you down in Florida. Belsky's dressed in white. He looks like Nehru at a convention in the 60s. Ives is dressed up looking like a Fruit Loop. And Munster, it's all this romance of media and that. You go into a top 5 long-only buy-side equity shop, and you're talking to heavyweights about their overcommitment to Mag 7. How do they respond, Dan Ives, to your enthusiasm?
The first thing I say is stop trying to find AI in your spreadsheet, because that's how many have missed every transformational tech name in the last 20 years. And 2, when you look at what's happening here, it's about some of the parts. Like I would argue like the autonomous piece for Tesla, that's not, and I'd say that's still the most undervalued AI play in the market today, not being fully valued. You look at what the ultimate valuation and what this is going to do from financially for Mag 7 is still massively underappreciated, and it speaks to why I believe next year tech stocks are up another 25%.
Gene Munster, when you go into the CFA crew at a long-only buy-side shop, pick your victim, Federated, Fidelity, whatever. Gene Munster, what's your terminal value? Can you go out 5-year vision, 7-year vision?
Yeah, I think that those are hard to, modeling out 5 years is difficult, but that's ultimately where money is made. And to answer your question on the 5-year vision on this, is I would simplify just kind of across mega cap, is that they're going to grow faster for longer, simple as that sounds. But again, I think the Broadcom is representative of that. And so when I think about what that value creation is, I'm generally looking like a year, 2 years out. My opinion is, for example, a year from now, Apple is 315. I think that there's continues to move higher.
Gene Munster with us, and Dan Ives, thanks for the huge response, particularly out on YouTube. Greatly appreciate that. Dan, I'm going to talk to short on Tesla. You're completely opposed. I got 141,000 employees. I got single-digit revenue growth. I got a PE of maybe 170. How do you equate that to Mag 7 success? How do you get those ratios which tell you south into your call north?
Sure. So I think on Tesla, it continues to really be about autonomous and AI. And when you think about the story going forward, it's going to be at full self-driving penetration, autonomous, and what I've ultimately
So you
believed.
believe that stuff?
Oh, how about this? I think
Paul, let us be respectful. You wouldn't talk to Gene Munster that way.
No, I would not. You're right.
So look, I think over the next 4 to 5 years, there will be a point where Sweeney is getting into a cybercab, no driver, taking him to play golf. That will happen next 4 to 5 years.
All right. I mean, if that happens, that is a whole new game.
But that's our view. And again, the whole issue is that between the Musk-Trump bromance, the reason it's so important for the stock is because now regulation in this country is going to rapidly change in terms of autonomous. And that, we believe $1 trillion alone for Tesla's valuation just based on autonomous.
Gene, get us up to speed on this. And you come at this from Loop Ventures and Deepwater Asset, where you've really dived into the entrepreneurial part of technology. Do you buy the Ives story?
100%. I mean, I think that the reality is that if you're born today, there's no chance that born in the U.S. today, there's no chance that you're going to ever need a driver's license. If you're 8 years old today, there's no chance. And
or Gene, talk about what you talk about, like with your kid, like how you always say, like your kid, like will your kid, yeah.
So I have a daughter. She's 8 years old, and I had a bet just after she was born that she would never have a driver's license. And a couple of weeks ago, I tried the latest version of Tesla FSD for 20 minutes and had a couple interventions. It's not there yet, but it is remarkable the progress that's making. And I think that the whole conversation around Tesla very few people are actually experiencing how far along they are. And then you layer on top of that the fact that humans are becoming worse drivers. 40,000 plus people lose their lives a year in auto accidents in the US alone. And then you layer on top of that what GM Cruise announced this week, basically backing off from autonomy. It just leaves this wide open opportunity for Tesla to really be, I think, one of the two key players within autonomy. And so I think that that's not fully appreciated in shares of Tesla.
So Dan, when we think about the Tesla story, I mean, part of me, the cynic in me, thinks Elon Musk is trying to get me to take my focus away from bending metal, which is a low margin business, competitive business, to other bets, to use a term. But you think those other bets, like autonomous driving, robo-taxis, are real?
But I view it similar to, like, as Keene's talked about for a decade. It's like with Apple, but originally, and Gene's talked about it as well, you just looked at Apple as a hardware player, smartphone.
Yep.
But what's been the key of the valuation, why it's going to be the first one in the $4 trillion market club? It's because of services. It's because so when you think about Tesla, I would compare autonomous, the software, FSD, to Apple's services relative to that Cupertino story. That's why it's so important. 7 million vehicles out there. You'll have 10 million vehicles over the next year or two. And even when you look at Waymo, which is the Google Play, those are $200,000 cars.
I got to get this in. Yesterday we had great coverage. Thank you to our team for linking it up with the president-elect at the New York Stock Exchange. The billionaire of the United States was not there. I answer the critics of Elon Musk and Ives. Is he getting taxpayer support for all of his ventures? Is he getting a free ride off the back of the American taxpayer?
I disagree. I would argue you're talking about he made a bet for the ages with Trump and essentially iced out, if you look at last administrations when it comes to Biden administration, especially around EVs. And now you're going to really see him doubling down. And within the Beltway, there's going to be major changes, and when that knock at the door happens, it's Musk.
Gene Munster, give me an EV update. We won't let the Chinese in. Europe's, I read about BMW and Mercedes. It's a train wreck, basically, no pun intended. Gene Munster, what is the optimal EV strategy for our listeners across America?
Well, if you're thinking about buying an EV, buy it in the next 2 weeks in the U.S. because what could happen with those tax credits? As far as like what's happening with the broader market, just looking at Tesla, for example, units are basically going to be flattish for calendar 24. Musk talked about 20 to 30% growth for next year. So a huge rebound that surprised analysts, investors. The street right now is looking for 14%. So kind of saying that Elon's being too optimistic on that. But I think the big picture, Tom, is that we're coming through the EV winter here into starting to be a spring. And ultimately, I think that EVs just are naturally a better way to move around. It's not a political statement. It's basically a physics statement. And I think that the free hand of the market will prove out that it's a more efficient way to move, which will ultimately have EVs. I consider it an undeniable truth that eventually all vehicles will be electric.
Gene, I'm cruising around the Jersey Shore with my Vespa scooter. I'm getting like 80 miles to the gallon. I don't need you and Dan Ives. But Dan, tell me about where you think ultimate demand is for electric vehicles, because I feel like we're in a bump in the road kind of moment here.
It's a bump in the road, but our view is that if you get to 20% EV penetration, call it over the next 4 or 5 years, that changes the game for Tesla. It changes the game really for the industry. But you look what's happening in Detroit with the big three. They're definitely starting to hedge that strategy in terms of, especially when it comes to hybrid. And I think this continues to be a bump in the road. It's not the end. It's a transitional state in terms of our view of the industry.
Thank you guys for lining this up. This has been great. Gene Munster, I didn't know you guys were in speaking terms. It's great. Gene
Munster's the GOAT.
Yeah.
He is.
Right on, saluting you here.
Greatly appreciate Gene Munster from Minneapolis. Well, Dan Ives, thanks for coming in. I'm looking at Aviator Nation, and they don't make my size.
Oh, they can make a special bow tie for you. I mean,
Aviator Nation bow tie.
Oh, I mean, look, that could change. And next thing you know, those sales would just go off the rack if Keene started wearing Aviator Nation bow tie.
What do you think, Paul? I mean, it's a fashion reach, to say the least.
But Tom, you're what we'd call back in the day. You're a big fella. You're not. I don't know if they got that for you. I mean, Tom's like a hockey player from Rochester.
It's like
they make him big up there.
Dan Ives, what are you doing for the holidays?
I mean,
going to Singapore?
look, the holidays is all about college football playoffs. It's about
Penn
this
State update.
team. Again, we got punched in the mouth versus Oregon, came back, gut check. Now SMU next week. Win that, go on to to Phoenix, and then we'll see what happens there.
Dan Ives, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
I'm watching the litmus paper of the system with Ebrahim Rahbari,
Yep.
and that is the foreign exchange market. There's so much signal there that pros are looking at. So we're going to get away from Dan Ives and Gene Munster in the next hour. And right now with us from Fordham Global Insight, Ebrahim Rahbari, a conic with Willem Bouter at Citigroup a number of years ago. Ebrahim, thank you so much for joining. Is Mr. Trump's worst post-inauguration nightmare a new, stronger dollar with DXY breaking ever higher?
It's great to be with you once more. And well, my take would be more that a strong dollar, more than anything else, reflects the strength and maybe even the exceptionalism of the US economy, and actually has the side effect of maybe helping him over the inflation concerns. So if you look back at the election, nobody really voted against the strong dollar or voted against high inflation. So as much as President-elect Trump likes to occasionally mention the dollar, I don't really think it's central in his sights.
Okay, so it's not central. Then what is within the foreign exchange and the geopolitical space? Is it what we see in France this morning? Is it Germany flat on their back? What's the top item for Ebrahim Rahbari into 2025?
Well, in fact, you put the nail on the head there. I do think for the foreign exchange market at large, Trump is still number one. And he's been obviously very highly publicized in the preponderance of the U.S. driving foreign exchange. But even in Trump's first term, and in 2022, when the dollar did outperform, it did so against the backdrop of weaker rest of the world growth. And the way that I look at the foreign exchange market right now is I think the market is right in seeing that exceptionalism go a little bit further. I'm sitting here in Germany today. We're looking at an election at the end of February. And I think it's almost certainly going to get worse before it can get better, and that means we will see yet further declines in the euro dollar and more broadly a further weakening in the euro against the other major currencies.
Is parity in play here for the euro? I'm asking for a friend of mine who's making reservations to Paris as we speak.
Yes, I think for investors, it's always very uncomfortable to be chasing a pre-existing and pretty long-running trend, and every valuation model will tell you the euro is pretty cheap. But in fact, parity would be my expectation to hit in the first half of 2025, maybe in the first quarter.
Oh, come on!
So
Can't we, Ebrahim? Can't we get euro parity? I'm thinking
by
December
Christmas?
26th at 3 p.m.
I mean, I certainly wouldn't rule it out.
Thank
Actually,
you.
Historically, the euro actually strengthens into the end of the year in December. And but there's a basic logic to it, which is into the end of the year and at the very beginning of the year, people like to buy cheap things.
Right.
And so the cheaper currencies, and then there's a corporate element. So I wouldn't necessarily get hung up on further weakness between now and the end of the year. But I think there is still more weakness for Europe.
Ebrahim, what do you expect? We've seen the ECB cut rates yesterday. Pretty much central banks across the globe, maybe with the exception of the Bank of Japan, are cutting rates. What do you expect the U.S. Federal Reserve to do next week?
So I think the Fed is actually in a very unusual spot compared to a lot of the other central banks. Because if you look at the Eurozone, Canada, Sweden, in particular, their economies are really weakening fast. Whereas for the Fed, if you took a survey, and maybe accepting your brilliant Pollyanna Wong, but most analysts at this point expect the Fed to cut next week, but don't really think that they should be cutting. So what that implies in the end is you're almost certainly going to get a hawkish cut. So the Fed will cut, and then it will say, well, we have some projections that will tell you we continue to cut at a different pace than we have done so far. But in practice, we are probably going to adopt much more of a wait-and-see approach. And again, I think that reflects a very different economic trajectory between the U.S. and many of the other G10 economies. And even for Japan, it's actually somewhere in the middle. Clearly, the interest rate trajectory is upwards,
Right.
but the economy has much more of a mix of developments, whereas the US has been pretty consistently strong. And I continue to see that happening into the beginning of next year, at least. So a hawkish cut next week should be on the cards.
Yeah, Ebrahim, I've got to do an audible here. Damien Sassauer's out in Scottsdale. I think he's at the Bad Little Nine today, the Scottsdale National Golf Club. It's really, really highly ranked. It's 9 holes. It's not 18 holes.
But that's plenty for
Damien.
Marfell, yeah.
So I got to go Latin America on you, Ebrahim, because Sassauer's not around. I'm looking at Brazilian real out to 6. Is it because Mr. Lula is so ill, or is that something that can be opportunistic for our listeners in global Wall Street?
So I do think Brazil is a very interesting case where, in a global perspective, and even maybe relative to its prominent neighbor Argentina, is at the opposites of investor sentiment. So Argentina recently being a darling, and Brazil suffering from a combination of factors, but they definitely include that there was a sense that the central bank was a little too casual about inflation risks. So I personally do think that we will end up seeing the Brazilian real on a total return basis outperform in 2025. But picking the bottom, of course, in these very volatile currencies can be very treacherous. But nevertheless, I would be on the positive side of Brazilian real returns in 2025. And again, it's an interesting contrast to the prevailing sentiment at present.
Ebrahim, thank you so much. If you and Tina Fordham are in New York together, we would be honored to have both you and Tina Fordham into the studio with us. Mr. Rahbari with Tina Fordham at Fordham Global Insights.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Coffee is a moonshot. The summary is Brazil and Vietnam challenges, but it's always more nuanced than that. She's truly expert at this out of Reading. And LSE, Kona Haque is absolutely iconic on what are called the softs, away from oil. Maybe a little bit of metal is thrown in there, but it's mostly about the agricultural research she did at Reading University and bringing that over worldwide at ED&F Man. Kona, thank you so much for joining. I mean, I got ED&F Man doing the touchy-feely coffee of Volcaf, making coffee business better together. We're going to be green. We're going to go out and help the farmers. Is that all pushed aside by the crisis of coffee? Is the pricing so egregious that the normal business of coffee is shifted?
Oh, I think we're in an extreme part of the cycle. At the end of the day, all commodities are very cyclical. Agricultural markets, obviously, because of the weather cycles. But within the agricultural space, I would argue that the soft commodities, which are basically just grown in the tropical countries, have more heightened and more extreme cycles. And arguably, as we move towards more climate change impacted scenarios, those cycles are going to be more extreme. So what we're seeing in situation is, as you mentioned, unprecedented droughts in Brazil, severe droughts in Vietnam. These two countries are the biggest producers and exporters of coffee. You know, number one Arabica exporter, number two Robusta exporter. You know, so they are massive. And when you have two producers seeing droughts leading to drops in yields, inevitably you see a supply contraction. The supply-demand fundamentals go out of whack. Prices spike up, stocks start falling, and you get the situation we're in today. So yes, it's extreme, but not and we've reached record highs in terms of the Arabica price, but it's not unprecedented. These are the cycles we have to live with.
I don't know. I don't like living with this. I got coffee on my screen here, up 71% year to date. My double short mocha at Starbucks, Route 35 in Wall Township, New Jersey, $5.83. It was like $3.50 a year ago. I don't know what's going on. So, Kona, is there any solution if I'm a coffee farmer? Is there any solution there technologically that can even out some of these swings here in the climate?
No, it's not that easy. And maybe what today's high prices are doing is exactly telling you that we're going to have to invest in more science to adapt to extreme weather event scenarios, and so the yields can still continue to be future-proof. Maybe that's what the prices are telling us. But in the short term, it's tricky because they're tree crops. They're not row crops like corn or wheat, which grow every year. As soon as the price goes up, farmers go and plant a lot of them. In the case of coffee, it takes 3 to 4 years to grow from a tree from seedling level to become full fruiting.
Okay. Didn't know that.
And then as long as weather is good, it'll take some time to improve. And on the demand side, demand is pretty sticky. It's inelastic. People find coffee a small luxury that they don't need to sacrifice, they don't need to forego. What we have started to see is consumption from outdoors, like in the outdoor coffee shops, are slowly transferring into at-home consumption because it's cheaper at home. And within the at-home consumption, we're seeing downgrades to lower quality, maybe own brands, private labels.
Kona,
so people are doing what they can.
Yeah, Kona, USDA was out with a summary on Vietnam, and they say just in the last 3 days that they're seeing more planting. Farmers are motivated because of high coffee prices to plant more trees. Is the coffee equivalent, what I use in my speeches, for monopsony, which is a rubber plantation in Singapore? Is in Brazil and in Vietnam, coffee where all the powers in the hands of the big companies, the shippers, the regional business people, and not in the power of the farmer?
Farmers will sell to the traders, the middlemen. The traders then sell to the roasters. And some of them are small roasters, some of them are the big roasters. The big roasters are the likes of Nestle, Starbucks, JDE, Peet's. So, no, I would, depending where you are, yes, and maybe in the USA, a lot of the final coffee that we consume is in the hands of some big multi organizations and international corporations. But in different countries, you have small roasters as well, so different medium sizes as well. And now increasingly, where you're seeing more and more independent roasters popping up, there's a real trend for that.
Kona, what's the outlook for coffee here? I mean, I guess it's an agricultural question, but what are the growers telling you about the next, year, 2 years, and what their expectations are?
So prices are definitely high. So the incentives, as you mentioned, are very strong. If weather complies, then they will look after their crop next year. But when we did our crop tours, because at ED&F Man we do our crop tours, and what we saw was that the rains, the lack of rains in Brazil during our summer had a very bad impact on the blossom set. So the blossoms look good, but those blossoms and flowers didn't convert into actual buds and cherries.
Wow.
So that's why we didn't see a crop. And that's that's the problem we're facing. And a lot of farmers thought this is not great. We're going to have to completely stump our trees. So we'll see recovery for sure in 2026, but not in the short term.
Kona, one final question. Lisa emails in and says, ask Kona if a peppermint mocha frappuccino blended beverage at Starbucks, is it going to top tick $10 here? Kona, are we heading for a $10 Starbucks?
But how much does it cost today?
$8, so says Lisa, daily, with profanity wrapped around it.
Because when you asked what are the solutions to this supply demand tightness, one of the solutions is that consumption has to fall, and for consumption to fall, these roasters are going to have to pass on the higher cost to the retailers, and ultimately, yes, if higher costs leads to people thinking $10 is too much, let's give it up, then that's what we need to happen.
Kona Haque, thank you so much. Honored. With ED&F Man, I can't say enough about their Vol Cafe research project in support of farmers amid this crisis as well.
So she does crop tours.
Oh,
she
she's
goes
huge.
to like Vietnam,
like she's saying, like the
Brazil,
flowers and the buds and
wow.
like Darjeeling tea and Kathmandu or Nepal or whatever.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg terminal.
The daily look at the front pages, the Lisa Mateo Hour. What's it like to be mentioned on the Costco conference call? That was pretty cool, Lisa.
Imagine that. Yes, those Costco earnings this morning. All right, we've got so much to get through for today, and I'm glad it's back up to an hour from a minute and a moment. So here we go. We're starting off with the battle between human and robot ride-hailing drivers at airports. We're talking about Waymo One, okay? They're owned by Alphabet. They already offer airport trips in Phoenix. They're waiting approval, in other markets. I don't know if I would take one. I'm still on the fence about it. But if its robo-taxis continue expanding, experts are telling Business Insider, here's the thing, human ride-hailing drivers, they could see their incomes take a big hit as these robots start to come in. They're some of the most profitable trips for them, right? They often have higher fares, strong customer demand. That's the reason why.
Yeah.
And the Uber and Lyft drivers are telling them that their gigs are already less profitable.
If the robot thing gets through the traffic, it's got to make that turn off the bridge onto the FDR.
Good luck.
It's got to make that turn. It's like Junior Helix over on the Upper East Side.
I mean, I got in
there.
a car this morning with some dude I've never seen before in my life at 4:30 in the morning. What's the difference between getting in with a robot car? I don't know.
It's a human.
I don't know. I don't know.
I
don't know who this guy is.
more comfortable with the human. I don't
Next.
know. Oh, gosh. Okay, so Tokyo planning a 4-day work week for city employees, okay? They want to reverse their low birth rate. That's the whole reason behind it.
So if I'm working less, I'm procreating more?
No, the thing is, that's a good way to think about it. But they're saying it'll make the work-life balance better, so that they'll have more time to take care of the children. So that's the whole reason behind it, because they're on track. 16th consecutive year of decline for their population. So again, this is city employees. This is for April of 2025. But the way it works, it lets them adjust their working hours to free up one day, so they get to choose what day that is.
Afterthoughts trying to get me to go to a 6-day work week.
That's
where we,
6 days.
That's where we are. I tried to get her to empty the dishwasher last night. Went down in flames.
Good luck with that. I had the same fight.
All right, this story I am very concerned about.
Did you notice when you went to, this is British pubs, okay?
Yep.
British pubs running out of Guinness, okay?
Wow.
Huge story. This is the New York Times. Apparently, the parent company, Diageo, they've limited the amount of beer that the UK wholesalers, distributors can buy each week because of this surging demand, because they're fearing this shortage coming up. The reason they're fearing a shortage is because Guinness was once this old-timers beer, right? But it's become popular with Gen Z. Those are those drinkers up to 27, from drinking age to 27. It's been this marketing push they've been pushing there. They've had celebrity endorsements, but there's also this viral drinking challenge, okay? It's called Split the G. I don't really understand it, but it means that you drink enough in one chug to leave the foam with the first letter of the branding pint glass.
Who thought of that?
Apparently, this challenge going on.
All right, I was just at the Dublin brewery for Guinness back in September. There's like 3 dudes there making the whole stuff. It's not that big, and it's amazing with the stuff they put out there. I mean, it's just an incredible trip if you're ever in Dublin and check out the Guinness brewery. But I guess the kids are drinking it now.
What's it called? The G?
The split the G. Split the G. Yes, because the Guinness, the G.
Lisa, I learn something every day. Next.
I'm telling you, wealth of knowledge here. Okay, the last one. Oh, this is the bane of my existence. Okay, this is the cookie chain that teen girls are helping power to $1 billion in sales.
No idea what you're talking about. No idea what you're talking about.
Oh, Paul Sweeney, Crumble. It's those $5 700-calorie cookies.
Really?
That are huge.
Where do you get them?
You can get them in the store, but my DoorDash bill has just been skyrocketing from these things. So similar to Guinness, they're using the power of like social media and these TikTok challenges and things. So TikTok, YouTube, Instagram. It has a 30-plus person social media team, okay? 9.6 million TikTok followers. If you compare that, you say, how much is that? Starbucks only has 2.2 million, okay? So they do this thing, weekly menu changes. So instead of having the same cookies, each week they highlight a new cookie. So it keeps the interest going.
They're not on top. The social people, they misspelled it. But other than that,
Exactly. Crumbl.
The raspberry butter cake cookie.
Yes.
It's a mouth-watering butter cake cookie. Oh, gets this down at the bottom. It says, accept all cookies. I love that. Cute. Okay, Crumble. Like, have you been, Lisa?
I have been, and I have seen it arrive at my doorstep plenty of times.
Really?
Yes, it's the teen girls. They're all about this. They're posting reviews, and then Crumble repost those reviews. So then they think they're like, hey, I'm famous now. So it's fueling this whole thing with the girls. I'm telling you. But the way this company started, I mean, 2017, it was a single store in Logan, Utah,
Right.
and it just kind of blew up.
It's out of Logan, Utah.
Wow.
Logan,
How
Utah,
big
yeah.
is their social media team?
30 plus person social media. So we got to work on ours.
I hope Sparta's listening. Say it one more time for Sparta. How big is their
Sparta,
social media
30
team?
plus. How many is ours? One?
We got 2 interns, and one of them isn't here because they went to a party last night. And so we're sort
Crumble.
of going,
All right.
Crumble.
I
I'm
learned
telling
something
you,
new.
you have
No
to
E.
check it out.
No E.
Like
Is there
700
one
calories
nearby
a pop.
where we can go today and I can have a...
Sure, we can DoorDash it right here.
Yeah, exactly. I got the
on
Redo
Sparta's
Amex.
Yeah. The semi-sweet chocolate chunk.
How much is that? Oh, God.
I don't...
I'm telling you. They're
Well,
like
they get the
$5
calories
a
next
pop.
to it. I mean,
Lisa Mateo, thank you for the
Yikes.
Lisa Mateo Hour and our newspapers.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live each weekday 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.